Great. Good evening. Thank you all so much for having me. My name is Amy Geringer. I work with a firm called Stakeholder, and we've been working with the town to support the update of the Superior General Plan. So tonight I'm looking forward to kind of walking through at a high level, but with some detail, what the current draft general plan update is. Just as a note right now, that document is available on the town website in draft form for public comment. And we will be looking today from you all for any questions you might have and ways that the unit plan might be improved before going to council in March. I wanted to just provide a little bit of background about the purpose of a general plan and what we're really looking to accomplish with this effort. So a general plan is a vision document, it's a 20-year vision for the town. The goal of the general plan is not necessarily to reinvent a lot of things, but instead aggregate and kind of have a home for a lot of the activities that are already going on, while also maybe filling in some gaps related to some of the other required elements of a general plan that you haven't mentioned. So the general plan is a tool. It's really meant to be a tool or a guide for the town, for town management, for town council to make decisions and make recommendations for investment that the town's going to make as we grow and develop. And so you'll see in here that there's a lot of things that are recommendations, and there'll be recommendations for studies or recommendations for policies, but this certainly is a recommendation document, and there's a lot of things in here that are good practices, and it's kind of put it really up to the town on how they best use this document for their purposes. And it's really working to provide a framework to guide decision making as development occurs. And so this document isn't dictating any development, and I'll get to that a couple of times, but it is supposed to be a tool to help make decisions when development opportunities are in front of us. So a general plan is actually a document that is required by state statute. So all municipalities in the state of Arizona are required to have a general plan, and it's something that needs to be updated at a minimum every 10 years. And so there is some specifics as to what needs to be included in the general plan, and that is all based off of the Arizona revised statutes. So I wanted to provide just a little overview of what this general plan we developed for the town. The organization we've chosen, this organization does meet all the criteria and requirements of the Arizona revised statutes, but there is some flexibility in how you organize things and how even the different things that are called, the different elements of what they're called based off of what is going to work best for the town. And so this is how we worked with the town staff and some of our steering committee members who are here today on organizing this plan. All right, so in any good planning exercise, a plan needs to be rooted in a vision or a set of visions for the future. And this is going to be how the plan is developed, and a lot of the recommendations are kind of guided by addressing these various visions. And so there's going to be a lot of text, and I'm not going to read all the text, but I'll kind of hit on the key points of some of these visions. These are ones that certainly should not be a surprise to anyone, because they're really supposed to embody the things that the town and its citizens are the deep-rooted things that we need to guide. And so hopefully these have been vetted, and hopefully these all resonate with you as well. So the first one is related to being resilient and versatile. And so this one looks at this idea of resilience in public spaces, in the economy, in the infrastructure that the town invests in, and in the processes, the decision-making processes that the town puts in place to help make decisions. The second vision relates to vibrant and welcoming. This is really looking at this aspect of creating this kind of community, not just for residents and visitors, but for, not for current, just for current residents and visitors, but future residents and future visitors. We're really looking at that 20-year time frame. So this vision is really around activities and attractions, housing, businesses that create this vibrant and welcoming community. So vision 3 is related to a town that's supported and connected. And so this is supported and connected looking at our student and younger population, looking generally at residents and supporting them and their development and connecting residents. And also just a connected and supported network of infrastructure. And so we're looking at people and infrastructure related to this vision. And then finally, this vision of local and historic character. And it's what we heard loud and clear as part of this process is that this is something that is rooted in this community and it needs to be maintained. And we really, in fact, need to double down on it, especially as growth and development presents itself. And so it's really keeping and bolstering the community identity that's already really well established. So these 4 visions are things that really were weaved throughout our whole process. And as we walk through some of the recommendations, hopefully you'll see how some of these were weaved into those. So we wanted to provide a little bit of input before we go into recommendations, just around the community engagement that we could do as part of this process. And obviously that was one of the pillars of some of those visionary, the vision development that we went through. And so we had what we call stakeholder involvement, so kind of a subset of the larger public. And so we did a set of stakeholder interviews, partnering with the town and some of our other steering committee members to identify a subset of folks who we did specific interviews with to really understand the perspective of what's important to preserve, what's important that we maybe need to be looking at differently as we develop this document. So you see the list of representation that we had from those stakeholder interviews. We also had a steering committee, which I already referenced a couple of times. And so this was one that we wanted to get a good cross-section of folks. So we had folks from this committee, we had folks from the community development committee, and we also had members of council. And so being able to bring together that steering committee to support and kind of provide oversight into some of the processes related to this. So then the second facet of community and stakeholder engagement is related to public engagement. And so right now we're in our second round where we're doing these public meetings and providing different opportunities to get feedback on the draft general plan. But prior to this, we did do another round of feedback gathering, and it was in the form of a digital survey. But it was also available in hard copy form, so we wanted to make sure it was highly accessible. And so I wanted to provide just a little bit of feedback that we heard from that public survey. And before I get into some of the specific feedback, I wanted to emphasize that we actually got really excellent response. For a community of this size, and we had about 84, 85 responses, which is outstanding because sometimes we get that many in a community much, much larger. And so I was really, it really was nice to see how engaged this community is in its future. So looking at some of the questions that we asked in the survey, it was really around, what are the things that as we look into the future, we really want to preserve? What are the things that are important and kind of part of the foundation of the town? And so the things we heard from folks there are around the natural land, the town's history, and really that small town feel. And so as you saw, those were pretty well reflected in some of those visions, and certainly things that I'm sure resonate with everyone. Some of these items we asked questions just around what are the things that you'd like to see different, where maybe some different investments needed to be put in as we look to the future. And so a lot of the feedback that we got was related to the condition of roadways, just generally the condition and the amount of housing is what something we heard. Businesses, and then general aesthetics. And general aesthetics are things like weeds and sidewalk conditions and graffiti and that kind of thing. And so those are generally what we heard as some of the things that are bubbling up. at the top are just around things that we might be able to change. And then just some of the other findings we wanted to share that's related to this first public survey. We asked questions just around where should the town make investments as we move forward and as we grow and develop. And so what we really heard loud and clear was wanting to make investments in the existing neighborhoods. And so understanding that there's going to be growth, but everyone also sees a real need to continue to invest in the existing residency, existing neighborhoods that we have. The other one that we've heard frequently is really investing in downtown. And then just the final one we wanted to share was very specific, related to like a housing question. And so we asked a question around, what type of housing should we be investing in over the next 20 years? And what we heard here, that the top two related to single family housing and then mixed uses. And so I think there were a couple other items just related to public trade I did want to provide some context on. The way that we did this survey, while I said it was digital, there was also hard copies. And we did a pretty robust advertising. We've advertised through the newspaper multiple times. We advertised through Facebook. We advertised through flyers. We tried to get the word out there. We did also hold, so one of the things, when we did get the feedback, and we were really happy with that, but we noticed that we didn't have quite as good representation from some of the younger folks. And so some of the town staff were able to partner to do a youth focus group. And so that was one thing that we did include in part of this. And so it wasn't as well, it's not as well represented in some of these graphs, but it was weaved into all the other recommendations and some of those visions, because obviously that younger generation is really important when we're thinking next 20 years out. Before I go on, are there any questions related to any of this initial information about stakeholder or public feedback?
Because was that a certain grade level or age level? What was that?
So it was the youth council, so it was a decently diverse, I guess.
High school.
It was mostly high school.
You know the youth council.
Okay.
Are there any other questions?
This may be a little off topic, but presumably there's a general plan that have been in place already.
Correct.
And you've capitalized on that document to produce this one.
We have, in ways that were most prudent. One of the major reasons that the town is looking to update the general plan right now is because the current general plan is not providing the realistic expectations for growth and so that it was looking at population projections that were way off the mark. And obviously with some things like the annexation, there's just been a lot of change. And so while we made sure to pull out the pieces that were relevant, and we worked with folks to identify those, this is a pretty decent overhaul in it, because we heard that there was not a lot of there was a lot of things that needed to be improved by that to make it useful.
So with the 20-year horizon and updated every 10 years, presumably there's 10 years left on the existing general plan. I was wondering what didn't get accomplished in the past 10 years that wanted to get accomplished.
I think that it's less about what didn't get accomplished and more about the assumptions that were used in developing that last plan, or just they did not come to fruition, and it really made it a challenging plan to use because we were looking at population projections and other things that are just far beyond what we actually are seeing right now.
The population projection for Town of Superior by 2025 was 25,000 people. So if you base your plan on some flawed assumptions from the start, it becomes fairly useless as you start to really factor it out in the distance.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Todd, wasn't our last one just a minor?
We did a minor update in 2017. The plan was originally drafted in 2003. It was updated in 2009 and again in 2017. So it is quite a long tooth plan. It really desperately needed a complete overhaul.
Yeah.
And towards the end, I'll talk a little bit about that process, but it certainly, there is the intention that those amendments and updates do get made. This is not supposed to be a stagnant document, but every 10 years is really when you need to kind of really take a good look and decide if you need that full overhaul or what kind of refreshes. So that type of updating is actually healthy and very good and it should be going on.
I was surprised development should not be encouraged with up to 13%.
Yeah, it's an interesting community. There's folks here who come here because they want to be away, and then there's folks here who are so excited to share. And so it is. I think certainly there's folks on both sides of the spectrum. And I think what we need to do, and really the goal of this plan was to help the town manage the growth. And so we want growth, but we want to also be able to kind of manage it and proactively manage it so that it's done in a way that continues to kind of allow Superior to be that small town that folks like it to be while still being able to grow and develop. Any other questions?
No, all I said, when we did the last one, we had no idea we'd be annexing this much land, so this
That's another great point. There was a lot of good triggers to the timing of updating the general plan right now. And certainly time. All right, so I'm going to spend a bulk of my time, the rest of my time with you on the land use component. That's the one that in any general plan, that's the real need. That's the one that has the most visuals and things to work with. And so I'm going to spend the most time here and then go through some of the other elements at a little bit less detail. And certainly I can field questions, but just to preempt that. So the way that the general plan is organized is that each section, each of those elements, we start with an existing conditions discussion, just around what things look like right now. Then we go into looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and constraints, and then we look at recommendations. And so that's how I'm going to present a lot of these. So this first one here is just a very high level. There's much more detail around some of these opportunities and challenges in the actual plan, but I wanted to just highlight a few. So related to opportunities and challenges, obviously with the annexation and the amount of land that's now available, that's an opportunity, and that's a great reason why we're looking at some of it. Also, just there's a lot of the infill, right? Properties that already are part of the original town boundaries that could be redeveloped, and there's a lot of potential with that. And so both of those really take a lot of opportunity in it. Some of the challenges in the existing conditions, housing diversity, and I don't think that's surprising to anyone, and that's what we've heard a lot from the public too. Really need not just more housing, but more diverse types of housing. This idea of a housing and employment balance. Instead, do we have the housing that for folks who are going to work here and vice versa? And so making sure that there's a balance between the types of housing and the price point of housing and the folks who are working or who want to work. And then the last challenge to highlight is that even though we do have a lot of available land, right now there is a challenge because the town doesn't own a lot of that. And I know there are steps being taken, and which is excellent, but that is right now a challenge a little bit. And so another element as part of this land use and housing chapter is we did look specifically at what is that projected housing need. And so we, through this, and I know this is small, but there is a projection, the population projection, some of the development projections of needing more than 1,000 new housing units of all different kinds. And so that's something that was an important driver to some of the recommendations, both from a land use perspective and from a housing. So I have a couple of kind of slides to preempt before I show a map. And so wanting to just make sure that we understand the uses of a land use map as part of the general plan. And so when you look at the map is going to suggest a land use for the entirety of the now much larger annexed area. And it's not looking at specifically just town-owned parcels or So it is looking, because we need to be able to put in a land use and make sure that they're compatible uses. And so there's going to be a land use designation for all of the land within the now town planning area. Land uses that we're going to suggest are not zoning. And so one item coming out of this general plan is that there may be a need to look at the zoning code and make sure that it's going to be reflecting the general plan, assuming that it is supported and adopted. But within a land use, there's many zoning types that could be identified as part of a larger land use. And so in the general plan, there is some specific guidance on, in this land use, here's the type of different zoning or different types of kind of more specific uses. So for example, an area that's zoned as medium density residential, we would expect to have things like neighborhood scale commercial or parks or civic uses. And so it's not something that says residential doesn't mean that it's only houses and there's no other types of uses. And so that's an important qualifier as we look at land use plan. The final note here, and I've said this once, but I told you I'd say it a few times, the land use designation on that map does not mean that there's impending development. Right, the tool and this map specifically is a planning tool to help make decisions and help guide development. And so when we're suggesting a certain type of land use, that doesn't mean that there's any development coming in tomorrow saying this is what I'm going to build, but instead it's kind of providing the town that opportunity to make sure that when there are opportunities for development, they can look at the land use map and say, is that compatible with where our vision is for the town? So just a couple of other items just related to the land use map. There are some new land use suggestions that we put into this. And this is this is normal, right? Where the town got much bigger, there's a lot of different opportunities. And so there was some need to really consider some different kind of land uses beyond what was provided in the initial general plan. And so those are the ones I'm going to be highlighting today. New land uses doesn't necessarily mean that there's new zoning, but it is reasons to kind of think through what might be the possible zoning implications of some of these different things. And then there is one other item here that I'll talk a little bit more, where there's a recognition in this plan that there's going to be more detailed master planning for portions of this larger, the now larger planning area. The general plan is not going to get to the certain specification of saying, okay, within this larger development, right here's where a park needs to go, right here's where the collector chutes need to go. There's an element of master planning that as development, as people come in and want to do things, some of these sub areas are going to have to be master planned, and that's the function of the general plan is to provide that higher level guidance, but there will need to be more details around specific development and master plan. All right. So here is the proposed land use map as part of the general plan. And so, like I said, I'm focusing mostly on the new land use designations that we're recommending as part of this. But a lot of them still are some of the traditional ones that the towns are using. And so the two here, so I'll start with the gray because I just spoke about this. And so anything in that kind of gray hatching, so anything that has that horizontal line, or the diagonal line, are those areas where we suggest a land use, but because of the lack of anything there right now and just the how long-term some of that development might be, those are the areas where that kind of master planning needs to happen. So in order for the general plan to be a document that can provide a 20-year vision and have that staying power for at least the 10 years, if we put a road network right now, or if we put specific park, it's going to be wrong, and we don't want that for the general plan. So those areas are ones where generally we identify the land use. That should help with making some of those more specific site development decisions. The other one on this slide is related to Main Street commercial. And so we certainly have commercial land uses right now, but we thought it was really important just with momentum behind Main Street and the value that folks put on Main Street, and the downtown area, that we thought there should be a specific land use that really supports the kind of development that people are envisioning for downtown. And so you'll see that obviously is very specific to the Main Street area, but we do think there's value in having a specific type of land. So the other two designations that I wanted to walk through a little bit, so this darker red related to highway commercial. And so this is a new land use that really looks at opportunities to better connect the US 60 to the downtown. And there's going to be land uses that will support some of that higher vehicular traffic volumes. And so we are looking at some of these areas that if we could do a land use such as what we're calling highway commercial, it can really help provide that connectivity, both because a lot of that visual and the land uses will support the connectivity between the. And then the last one here in this purple is related to what we're calling employment center. And so one of the big things that we heard and engaged a lot with as we went through this general plan update is the opportunities that are arising from this annexation to really try and encourage new employers and things, especially along the US 60, and also especially with the airport. And so looking at some of the recent efforts around the airport master plan, around some of the economic development strategies, and so providing a land use that supports the type of development and uses that we want to see along there, really for employers to have a place that not only people can work, but that they can go and have lunch, and they can also potentially live nearby. It's a really attractive way to start trying to attract those types of uses and employers. And so we are suggesting this new land use, especially along that use. Are there any questions in the land use map or some of these different designations that were proposed?
I have a question.
Sure.
What are those slashes? Diagonal slashes?
Yeah, so the diagonal slashes is what is that area that we said it needs that kind of more further refinement
Okay.
around, so more further master planning.
The one with the dark purple, that one's already throughout, pretty much. That one's already like commercialized. The one with it's,
That's the area around Emirates.
yeah. It's already like industrialized already.
So I think because we're looking at how to tie the vision into, so it doesn't need to change what it currently is, but more that there may be the opportunity that if there's if there's turnover, if there's changes, these are the kinds of uses that may be considered for this kind of area. And so I think the industrial uses can work, but as opportunities arise that it might be able, that it might change, it would be looking at a more mixed use rounded area. And I'm happy to take questions afterwards as well. So as I noted, the way that we were working through this is that we do provide objectives and some recommended strategies as part of this, working towards achieving those various visions. And so I wanted to just be able to define some of these terms before we dug into them. So an objective is really, for each of these elements, each of these chapters, an objective is looking at how we translated those visions into that specific element. And so it's the way that we look at being versatile and being welcoming and being vibrant. You'll see some of that is how we translate it into some of these objective statements. And then underneath each objective is a set of example strategies. And there are quite a few. And so certainly today when I go through them, I'll highlight the objectives but I'm just going to give a sampling of some of the example strategies, but there's a much more robust amount in the actual draft plan. The other thing that I do want to identify here is that a lot of the example strategies are things that the town's already doing, and or they're things that have already been a recommendation as part of a recent study or plan. And so they're not necessarily all brand new things that no one has thought about, and suddenly there's all these recommendations that are being put on the town. But instead, it's just a way to kind of aggregate and organize things as part of this project. So specific to the land use, housing, and development chapter, and I wrote this actually up very well, I apologize for that. But the objectives here related to, so this first one says support neighborhood affordability and stability. And so under that objective in the plan, there's a whole variety of strategies on how I might be able to go about doing that. The second is strengthen superior commercial corridors. We see a lot of that, including some of the land use designations that we're here. The third, here, encourage development that is compatible with existing uses and the needs and visions of the town. And so again, that's the whole point of land use planning, as well as of course the zoning code, is supporting compatibility of uses and making sure that we're providing safe and compatibility between parcels that are next to each other. And then the last one, prepare for future increases in demand for public spaces and infrastructure. And so we all know with the annexation, there is going to be need for new roadways, new water and sewer infrastructure, and things that really just around some strategies to best be ready for making some of that. So that is mostly what I wanted to talk about land use. Are there any questions before I move on to some of the other elements? All right, so the next chapter is on transportation. Obviously, transportation and land use are things that go hand in hand. If you're gonna be successful in one, you have to have the other. So the transportation element is important. So just again, looking at some of these opportunities and challenge. Right now, the transportation system provides good access to the town, to the different neighborhoods, to the different amenities. There is good access right now. The airport is an opportunity for sure. There's a lot of documentation and work just around what the future of the airport could bring to the town, and so that we see as an opportunity. And then right now, because of the good access and because there's not a lot of congestion, there's not a lot of crashes relatively. And so yes, of course, there's always going to be some, but really that's right now kind of an opportunity or a strength. Some of the challenges specific to transportation is ongoing maintenance. The town has done a really good job recently of trying to address, especially some of the pavement. And so I think that the thing there is always going to need maintenance, and that's just a challenge, especially as we expand in the town's footprint. There's going to be more things to maintain. Some other challenges just around specifically crossing US 16, we've heard that quite a bit, just in both safety and just the connectivity for Superior, that making sure that both the areas south and the areas north are safe enough. And generally, just specifically for the transportation system, managing growth and making sure that the investments are made, or that the proper costs are shared as urban development occurs, because it can very quickly, whether it's infrastructure degradation or having a lot of more vehicles or more trucks, or those kinds of things might be the way to growth. And so there are things we just want to make sure. Excuse me. So here's our transportation objectives and just some example strategies. And so I'll read the objectives because I know it's not easy to do there. So the first one, have a process for prioritizing and implementing transportation specific projects. And so this is something I think recently, especially with some of the pavement work that's been implemented, but generally, especially as things grow, it's going to be important to be able to identify your needs, have a established process to identify your needs and prioritize them as something available. The second is ensure adequate funding to address transportation priorities. And so this kind of goes hand in hand that we not only need the process, but of course, having and planning for the right funding to address priorities. They're to create a safe, accessible, and connected multimodal transportation network. And so one thing that will be important there, multimodal in the way we define it here is really looking at enabling not just driving, but also walking and biking. And we do include in here some recommendations specific to transit. That is something we've heard a few times just from various folks around. You know, there isn't, if you don't drive, how do you get to your doctor's appointment that might be in the Phoenix metro area, or different kind of ways to provide public transportation or some supportive transportation for specific times. And then the fourth, they are planning and prepared to address future circulation demand resulting from development. And so this one is considering plans and policies and standards for making sure that we can manage and kind of drive the type of transportation network we want to see rather than just accept what their development might be. Any questions or clarifications related to transportation that you get? Okay, so open space is the next element here, and so looking at some of the strengths and challenges, and in general, open space is a strength here, but there's been a lot of investment and a lot of energy around that. But some of the challenges related to open space that we saw is that some of the infrastructure, there can be improvements in kind of that flexibility, that multi-purpose of park and other civic infrastructure, as well as just generally needing to kind of have a plan or some standards for being able to expand parks. So especially at some of those areas, like the residential areas might grow or be developed, making sure there's a plan in place so that those parks do get put in by development for that kind of thing, so that we're not leaving big areas that don't that recreational space. So related to the open space objectives, the first one, identify and plan for future parks, as I just noted, protect the environmental resources that support natural and park open space. The third here, refresh amenities in existing parks and open spaces. And then fourth, connect superior and surrounding regional and national natural open spaces. And I think that's, again, that's a good example of one that is not doing really well right now, and it's just important to document and information. Okay, the next element here is about environment and water. And so I think what we saw is there is a really strong and proactive management of a lot of this right now. There's been a lot of conservation around, or I'm sorry, a lot of planning around conserving these resources, especially with a lot of the environmental impact statements and things that come from very active and very proactive around this. But generally, it's just hard. As you grow and develop, there's a lot of challenges around making sure you conserve these resources. But it's particularly important here because that is one of the big draws and one of the things that is foundation superior. So objectives for open space or environment and water: mitigate flooding and stormwater impacts, mitigate impacts to the natural environment, support the water and sewer infrastructure to accommodate current and new resident needs, and allocate the cost of water and sewer expansion between the county superior and development. And so there's a few things in here that are already being done really well, and we keep doing them. That last one probably is a little bit of a different one, is really some strategies on how to set the town up so that as development does come, it's not all on the town to be providing some of the expansion or service upgrades to services that are required. All right. Economic and community development. This is another one. There's been a lot of work done around this, and so the general plan here is really looking to aggregate it. We're not overriding any of the recent work related to economic strategies or tourism, so you'll see a lot of things that are hopefully pretty familiar. So some of the opportunities, just generally that we've been saying, there is interest and there's a lot of attractive features about Superior for both economic and general I guess, attracting both businesses and residents. But some of the challenges, especially when we're thinking about the economy, is just uncertainty. And there has a specific level of uncertainty just with some of the mining opportunities, and not really, there isn't a clear path, especially as you're working through this document, and so needing to just make sure we're adaptable and flexible. Some of the others, the opportunities and challenges are similar to some of the things, housing supply and the need for more shovel-ready sites for businesses and folks. So some of our economic and community development objectives, create a diverse economy to attract residents and visitors, encourage the development and retention of local talent, support the development of Superior as a recreation destination, and maintain housing affordability so that existing and new residents can live in Superior. One of the other things that we talked about actually in the Community Development Committee is that while it seems like sometimes we talk about the mining opportunities as more of a challenge, there really is an opportunity related to that too, and making sure that if the town can be proactive and stay in front of it and make it something that is investing in the town rather than just taking it from the town. And so I'd like that from that. Did want to share that, and that's something we will be in the actual document before it. Any questions? All right, and then I'm not going to spend very much time on this last one. This is one of these required elements, but it's not a very exciting lead. It's a pretty long list of a lot of different financing and funding opportunities to do a lot of this different stuff. And so the objective here, this first one that I touched on before, just making sure development pays a fair share of the cost of new or expanded public services. Ensure funding and installation of appropriate infrastructure, promote redevelopment that maximizes the use of town facilities. And so that's an important one because there has already been investments and maybe that's using the investments we already have, in addition to obviously basic investment. And encouraging new business development in locations adjacent to commercial and industrial plants. And so again, that's the idea of infill and just the efficiencies of being able to actually fill in parts that are already served by water. So as I noted at the beginning, we just had a quick discussion here on updating or implementing updating the plan. And so I wanted to emphasize that this is a plan, right? Just the function of a plan is documenting these visions and recommendations and kind of be able to at this time what makes sense towards achieving those visions, but things change. And we saw that from the previous general plan that there were certain assumptions and those changed and it made it required changes to this plan. And so we did as much as we could to be able to make a lot of the strategies and make things adaptable as things change, knowing there is a lot going on and there is some uncertainty. But as we also noted, this should be kind of I'm sure you hear the term like living document, right? It's something that we want to be able to engage with and not have it go stagnant. And so it's okay that things might change. That the plan can change, the land use can change, just like we do the same process for its zoning needs to change. And so that process is good and should happen, and we should be engaging with it to see, we did our best guess for right now in 2022 and 2021, but things are going to change in that 5-10 years. And so we should, there are processes and it should be encouraged that it's okay to engage and update this point. So just some quick next steps. We do have our council presentation on March 10th. And as I noted earlier, the full draft plan is currently available on the planning and zoning page in the plan and study link. There's also some printed copies here. And we will be posting this presentation as well as a recording of this presentation so that folks can watch it. It's also streaming right now. And we are excited to get feedback so that we can make some final plan updates and go process. Are there any additional questions I can answer?